Well, it is the rising cost of living, which is seeing a lot of parents struggle to pay their school fees. It's a survey, the latest survey conducted by TPN Credit Bureau. It's showing that parents are not making any payments towards their children's school fees last year. It's a growing number as well. I'll get you the stat in a moment. It's attributing this to all the interest rate hikes and, of course, household incomes, which have become stagnant. So just how bad is it? Let's find out from Waldo Marcus, Head of Marketing at TPN Credit Bureau. Waldo, good to have you on ENCA. When we talk about some parents struggling, is there a number you have for me as far as a percentage is concerned?
Good morning, Gareth. Yes, we look at schools across South Africa in these annual surveys that the TPN Credit Bureau conducts. And to give you an idea, last year, almost a quarter of parents made no payments towards school fees. And that includes both government schools where fees are charged, as well as private schools. Only 62.57% of parents were in good standing at the end of last year. Compared to 2021, just after the pandemic, that was actually sitting at 63.75% of parents in good standing. So we are seeing a deterioration from previous year, but what is a big concern is that number of parents that's just not making these payments.
And the problem is many people would have blamed a high non-payment from parents on COVID because many lost their jobs, many had gone into half salary, but that was more than a year ago now. What is the research attributing this to, Waldo?
I think the main cause here is that household incomes have not kept up with inflation. The South African economy continues to taking huge knocks in terms of exchange rate, fuel price increases, inflation, commodity prices that's not stable, as well as, of course, load shedding, where a lot of resources that would have necessarily gone to paying things like school fees is now kind of diverting to just keeping the lights on for a little bit longer. You mentioned COVID. So during COVID, during the peak of the pandemic, we only had 50% of parents in good standing. 2 years later, we were sitting at 63%. So we had a really good recovery. Last year, we had the dip. So it shows that the parents were willing and able to pay. But last year was really, really hard on the consumer as a whole.
Does the survey go into the kind of detail where parents are simply unable to pay? They don't have the resources. The money just isn't in the bank account versus those who possibly could do it but are just choosing not to try and rather keep the money for something else? Does it go into that kind of detail?
We don't go into those details unless the school specifically conducts a credit check with the Credit Bureau, whereby they have a good understanding of affordability as well as how other credit agreements are outstanding, including bonds, motor vehicle finance. But us dealing with a lot of schools, and we have a lot of communication with them, we do see some schools being highly frustrated that they new cars coming in, school holiday pictures being posted, yet the parents does not necessarily pay their school fees. Another interesting trend we've picked up, but it's quite cyclical. First quarter of the year, parents pay their school fees. Second and third, they hold back until the last quarter, whereby they then try and catch up. Those are due to various reasons. Bonus time for a lot of people that are employed, so they do make that payment to ensure that their child is re-enrolled within the private school specifically. And then that really kind of creates a huge challenge for our schools in terms of cash flow, because quarter 2 and 3, they're just not getting the revenue in that they need to keep up with their requirements in terms of salary payments, maintenance, infrastructure development. And we've seen schools struggling in those 2 quarters specifically, even more so.
And just as I start saying goodbye to you, Waldo, a survey like this is really more for the schools to get a sense of what is happening with parents not paying. What does a school do with this kind of research? How does this fit into, as you were saying, their planning? They don't have money for infrastructure and all the other things you spoke about. What do they do with this sort of survey?
There's a couple of things. They number one, they look at budgeting, so budgeting cash flow. Number 2 is how do you vet your parents, your applicants, your enrollments correctly? when there is within public schools, there is exemption applications. So when exemption applications come through, that you process those correctly, understand that those who are applying for these exemptions actually are deserving. So their household doesn't have the income, someone lost their job, or those people that do apply for these exemptions, but they have full income and they're abusing the system. So this kind of survey helps them to say, well, what's my benchmarking? What should I be collecting? And how do I improve from a did not pay of 25% to a 20%? And we, as TPN Credit Bureau, offer a variety of services, but ultimately this just helps them to benchmark and then say, all right, where do we plan? Where do we see risk? And what does the future really hold for us?
It's very important as well, especially going into a new year. Try and work with the little bit of money that is coming in as well. It's not fair on the schools if parents can pay, as you say, and abusing the system and just choosing not to. Waldo, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll talk again. Waldo Marcus, such incredibly important research for schools about parents who are not paying. Head of Marketing at TPN Credit Bureau, joining us here on ENCA.